5 things really quickly about Carlson in Of Mice and Men. Number 1, he's concerned with utility. That is, something's productivity, its advantages, its benefits. And he says to Slim towards the beginning of the novella, "Got 5 pups, huh? Gonna keep all of them?" And it's interesting here that in my opinion at least, he tries to sort of mask a plan that he has to replace Candy's dog with one of these new pups that Slim's bitch has just given birth to. He tries to sort of mask that with a relaxed, casual approach, with the colloquialism, huh? He sort of just tries to work out, asks a couple of questions of Slim, tries to work out, oh, where is your dog? How many pups are you keeping? Really, it then transpires later in the conversation that he's got a plan. He wants to get rid of Candy's dog and he wants to replace it with a new pup, right? Why? Well, we hear a little bit about that. I can smell that dog a mile away. Got no teeth, damn near blind, can't eat. And it seems clear that Carlson is more concerned about the burdens of the dog, the burdens that the dog poses to the other men, than the benefits. He kind of almost seems blind himself to what Candy's dog offers Candy. And I wonder if this is sort of typical of the survival of the fittest, harsh, brutal mentality in 1930s USA. If you're not useful anymore, well, if you're not productive, if you have no utility, then you're sort of discarded or left by the wayside. And he lists those limitations, doesn't he? No teeth, near blind, can't eat. And all of those things kind of signify something about the elderly, the people that are past being useful. It's kind of a little bit eerie, isn't it, the way he talks about the dog? I know he's talking about a dog, but you've got Candy sitting right over there who is also kind of, I don't know how many teeth he's got, but we know that he's got a stump for a hand. We know he's very old and can't do the things that he used to do. So there's a sort of almost irony in the way that Carlson talks about the dog in front of Candy. I think Candy later in the novella actually makes the link. I think him and Slim both say, I wish someone would shoot me when I'm old and a cripple. Carlson then says, ain't nothing left for him. Can't eat, can't see, can't even walk without hurting. And I want this repetition of the verdict on Candy's dog. He does it, I think, 3 times in quite quick succession. It's like a sort of mantra, isn't it? Like he's sort of repeating it in a rhythm, in a rhythmic-like way. And that's emphasised by a few things. The tripartite sequence, so 3s often create a sort of rhythmic quality. The anaphora, that's where the start of a phrase or sentence is repeated, so can't, can't, can't. Even the syllables at the start, at least. Can't eat, can't see, duh-duh, duh-duh. And can't even walk without hurting. There's a sort of rhythm to it. And other people do this in the novella, we know that, because George repeats the dream to Lenny, and sometimes Curly's wife even sounds like she's sort of reeling off a kind of rehearsed dream or vision that she has in her mind about what her future could have been or will be. But what's interesting is his dream isn't really a dream as such, is it? Because it's more about destruction than creation. It's about taking away rather than bringing forth, if that makes sense. So Carlson's more concerned with utility than perhaps some of the other characters. He's concerned with productivity. Possibly this sort of echoes the general sense of 1930s attitudes towards people and work. He's also, and this kind of goes hand in hand with the first one, he's secondly unempathetic. Now this first one might be surprising, but we'll have a little think about it, and you can disagree with me, but this is my view. Come on, boy, he said gently. He said apologetically to Candy, he won't even feel it. Now this sounds caring, doesn't it? So you've got things like gently, the adverb gently, the adverb apologetically, and then that comment to Candy, he won't even feel it. So on the surface, he sounds like he might be being empathetic, but he totally misses the point, I think. Candy doesn't want his dog painlessly euthanized. He doesn't want to lose him at all. So I don't think it really dulls the pain to hear that the dog won't feel it. Carlson, I'm not sure, understands what's going on here. Candy's being ripped apart from his one connection in the world, his lifelong companion. I've had him since he was a pup, Candy says. He was the best damn sheepdog. So there's a history here between Candy and his dog, and Carlson thinks that he can solve that by just saying that the way in which he'll be killed will be painless. Then later, when he returns after shooting the dog, sorry, no, before that, he's just about to leave, and Slim says, sort of tries to allude to the fact that Carlson needs to take a shovel to bury the dog, without actually saying it. I think possibly to protect Candy's feelings. And Carlson's reply is, "What do you mean, Slim?" And there's a kind of total ignorance here, isn't there, of Candy's feelings. And I wonder if that shows that inherently, right at his core, a sort of permanent quality of Carlson's is that he lacks empathy, or at least lacks awareness of how others might feel. And if we could read that more sympathetically, and we could think, well, actually, maybe Carlson's just a product of his environment. His ignorance of that is because he's never felt it himself. And actually, he doesn't have any connection. He's a nomadic worker, an itinerant worker, moving from place to place in search of work. And so his relationships don't last very long at all. And so actually, this ignorance is possibly, is heartbreaking. So don't always, this is what I keep talking about in class, is you don't want to view characters as victims or villains, right? So it's not like a pantomime where there's a victim and there's a villain and they're separate entities. All characters are victims and villains, and you've got to work out which of those they are at which points. And sometimes they're both at exactly the same point. So here, Carlson's almost a villain, isn't he? Because he's not recognizing how Candy might feel as a result of having shot his dog, and as a result of maybe hearing about the fact that he's going to have to dig a hole and bury him. But Carlson's also a victim because he is a product of his environment in which people lack connection and so can't feel the things that ordinary humans would feel. Here we go then. So he returns, and there's this long list. It's a long process. Steinbeck devotes a lot of time to describing Carlson cleaning the gun. Here's a little section. He brought out the pistol, took out the magazine, and snapped the loaded shell from the chamber. And there's this kind of brazen, quite bold and unashamed, sort of an obvious cleaning of the gun. And you've got to think about what does that reveal about Carlson's character? Well, one thing I want to think about is sound here, and Steinbeck zooms in on it a couple of times with that word snapped, and then a couple of other times around that paragraph. And I wonder whether that symbolises the brutality of Carlson's act. So we've had a lot of silence before that. Look back in the previous pages, and just before the dog is shot, there's lots and lots of silence, and then someone cracks bends the deck of cards and makes a snapping sound, and everyone sort of jumps. And then the actual shot comes, and then he comes back into the room and he snaps the loaded shell from the chamber, and it's all, maybe it's just a reminder of what's just taken place, which is this sort of brutal killing, death of Candy's one companion. And so there's a sort of a lack of empathy here in how Carlson manages the situation. At the end of the novella, he does a sort of very similar thing. Lenny's just been killed. And what does Carlson ask George? Did he have my gun? You couldn't get someone more tactless, I don't think. What do you want when someone's just lost their lifelong companion? You don't really want someone inquiring after their gun. You want a sort of kind of empathetic hand around the shoulder, which incidentally is exactly what Slim does, doesn't he? He twitched at George's elbow or something, and then he moved very near him. Look at the end, the last page of the novella, and have a look at the contrast between how Carlson behaves towards George and how Slim behaves towards George. They represent very different approaches towards this situation. Okay, thirdly, he's aware of his social status. So watch my video on Slim if you're interested in a little bit more around how Slim kind of fits into the social hierarchy of the ranch. But it's interesting here, the preposition after stepped. So Carlson stepped back to let Slim precede him. So he acknowledges that Slim's superiority. And this kind of comes back to Carlson and what he represents in the novella, which is this person who is, like we've said, a product of 1930s America. And he recognizes skill and rank. And they matter in this world where kind of there's survival of the fittest, competition-like mentality. And I think Steinbeck kind of physically marks this through Steinbeck kind of adhering to the social hierarchy. So Slim is above him, and Carlson knows that Slim is someone who he can benefit from if he kind of respects Slim's position within the ranch's sort of social ladder. Then Carlson says a little bit later, "Damn right he is," said Carlson. "He don't give nobody else a chance to win." And this is about crooks winning at horseshoes. I wonder if this is a kind of racist comment, because the way that Crooks's skill is sort of underappreciated here is in stark contrast to how Slim's is, if you see what I mean. So Carlson's very resentful about Crooks's skill in horseshoes, and possibly, I mean, this might be a little bit of a stretch, but possibly that's in recognition of the fact that people of colour were seen as inferior, and so Carlson feels like his kind of position within the social hierarchy has been undermined in some way by Crooks beating him at this game. This is when Curly is sort of angry with Slim about possibly flirting with his wife, and then it all kind of boils over in the bunkhouse, and Carlson replies to Curly when Curly asks him to step outside, you come for me and I'll kick your goddamn head off. And it's really interesting here. Carlson, he doesn't fall for Curly's pretense, for the kind of show that Curly puts on. Carlson cuts right to the heart, doesn't he? He's about realism. Curly almost represents a kind of superficial, fake version of masculinity in 1930s America. But Carlson is almost like the archetypal man, the kind of the man that sort of doesn't deal with kind of fantasy or facade, but deals with kind of brutal realism. And then another last point here, probably isn't needed, but Carlson hurried out. This is when Slim orders him to take Curly to the doctor. It's just another example of him kind of accepting Slim's status on the ranch. Okay, number 4. Carlson is stubbornly set in his ways. Move that down there. The thick-bodied Carlson. That's how he's described as a character. It's really interesting looking at the different characters and how they're described and their appearance. So whenever Candy's mentioned, always his wrist stump is mentioned, possibly to kind of Steinbeck marking the fact that, well, Candy, his disability is what makes him, is his kind of main limitation. Curly's wife, well, she's always described as red, with the kind of the red lipstick, the red dress, and the kind of makeup and everything. Crooks and his back, and rubbing sort of the lotion on his back to soothe it, and possibly this physical description or this appearance of Carlson just kind of echoes what he represents within this microcosm of society. So there are sort of archetypal characters, aren't there? There are kind of characters typical of a certain person in 1930s America. Like Curly's wife represents a woman, Crooks represents people of colour. It's a little bit reductive, isn't it? But there are different characters that represent different types of people within 1930s America. And possibly this shows that Carlson is kind of set in his ways, doesn't he? He's thick-bodied. He's got a hard skin. Nothing's going to kind of penetrate or kind of make its way into Carlson because he's got a kind of hard, cold heart, and you can't get in there with any emotion. And this is sort of shown, possibly most obviously, when Carlson is broaching the subject of killing Candy's dog to Slim, and they get sidetracked a little bit where Wit shows Slim the magazine, and this Bill Tenner who's had his name in print and he's got into this Western magazine. And that represents a kind of dream, doesn't it? A sort of the aspirations that the men have, and the sense of fantasy and facade. Carlson, he's having none of it. He wants to get back to the topic in hand, which is dealing with a problem and kind of exterminating Candy's dog so that they don't have to tolerate the smell anymore. As is shown with it, that refused to be drawn in. And I've written down there, Carlson, he adheres, that means he obeys, the unspoken social code of self-interest over altruism. So he doesn't care about others, he cares about himself and what's going to affect his life. Finally then, and briefly, most important character in the novella. Now you might think, well, I could possibly get a question on Carlson, what would I do? And I'm going to make the controversial claim that Carlson is the most important character in Of Mice and Men. Carlson's Luger is referred to in numerous ways, but it's referred to 6 times, and every time it's clear that it's Carlson's. It's not always phrased as Carlson's Luger. Sometimes it's my Luger. Sometimes it's clear from the context that it's his. And so when Steinbeck does that, he forces us to make a symbolic link between the gun that killed Candy's dog and the gun that kills Lenny at the end. So there is no doubt at all that Steinbeck means for Candy's dog to symbolise Lenny. Now, Lenny shouldn't die, according to Steinbeck, I don't think, because Steinbeck's all about friendship and connection and what we need as humans in a world where we have everything is trying to make us isolated and insular. But he has to. According to the code of 1930s America, he has to die, which he does. But if he has to, George should do it. And that's the key difference between how the killing of Candy's dog is managed and the killing of Lenny is managed. George kills Lenny, Candy doesn't kill his dog. And it's worth kind of exploring why that is and what that represents about the various characters. But Carlson, it's really important that it's his, isn't it? Without that, we kind of miss something about what Lenny represents to George and what Candy's dog represents to Candy. Now, the other reason why Carlson is the most important character in the whole story is he gets the final word. He gets the final say. And he says, "Now what the hell you suppose is eating them 2 guys?" And I think this is the point of the whole story. And it's what Steinbeck's trying to get at. He wants to show us what 1930s American society misunderstands about life, about people. They don't see that the most important thing in life is human connection, social intimacy, togetherness. Those are the trademarks of what Steinbeck thinks is beautiful, is paradise, is Eden. He thinks those things make us what we are as humans. And America has lost it because of money or a lack of it, because of self-interest, because of hardship, because of competition. Those things have kind of taken over and left companionship to sort of fend for itself. So there are 5 things about Carlson.